Chosen one. They thought they were so clever. They hired a mind game master. You played the game of healing and won their soul. These professional soul assassins study human weakness, like surgeons study anatomy, emerging from elite psychological warfare programs where empathy becomes a scalpel and human connection transforms into a tracking device. This isn't just another attack you'll survive. This is the moment you discover that being chosen means you don't just win battles, you transform the very weapons sent to destroy you. But here's what they never calculated. You weren't playing their game anymore. You were operating from a frequency of authentic healing that would completely unravel their psychological assassin's entire worldview and transform their darkness into light. The first meeting was textbook precision. Your assassin entered your space smooth as silk, professional yet approachable, helpful enough to seem genuine while maintaining perfect distance for control. Every gesture calculated, every pause strategic, every word designed to build what the manuals call rapport, establishing trust before demolition begins. But you saw it all. Every micro-expression, every rehearsed gesture, every calculated move. Because chosen ones don't just survive manipulation, they see through it like glass. Your spiritual vision had been sharpened by every betrayal, every attempt to break you, every battle you had already won. You recognized the performance because you had transcended the need to perform. Classic techniques were deployed: mirroring, false empathy, strategic validation followed by subtle undermining. Your psychological terrain was being mapped, fault lines identified where pressure could be applied. What this predator didn't realize was that you had already rebuilt those fault lines into foundations of unshakable strength. You didn't react the way training manuals predicted you would. You didn't defend, didn't attack, didn't crumble or rage. You did something that would completely unravel this operative's entire worldview, something that wasn't in any psychological warfare playbook. Your mind game master came equipped with an arsenal of psychological weapons. The art of emotional manipulation had been studied like a chess grandmaster studies openings. Cognitive dissonance creation, self-doubt implantation, perception questioning, all these techniques had been perfected. The ability to seem like your closest ally while systematically dismantling your psychological defenses had been mastered. A carefully crafted persona was brought specifically designed to appeal to your supposed psychological needs. If research suggested you craved validation, the perfect validator would emerge. If analysis indicated you feared abandonment, the most loyal companion would appear. If profiles suggested you struggled with trust, the most trustworthy presence would manifest. But what was encountered was something sophisticated psychological training had never prepared for. You didn't fit the models, you didn't respond to triggers, you didn't fall into carefully laid traps. Because you had already been through the fire of transformation, you had developed a kind of spiritual immunity to manipulation. You sat there calm and centered, watching this master manipulator deploy technique after technique, each one falling flat against the fortress of self-awareness you had built. It was like watching someone try to pick a lock that no longer existed because you had removed the door entirely. Your assassin began to realize that standard operating procedures were failing. The psychological weapons that had never failed before were bouncing harmlessly off your energy field. Something unprecedented was happening. A target that couldn't be targeted, a mind that couldn't be gamed, a soul that couldn't be assassinated. You looked at your would-be destroyer, really looked, past the professional mask, past the careful construction of predatory identity, past the performance perfected over countless psychological assassinations. You looked straight into the core and saw something buried so deep it had been forgotten. You saw the wound, not the surface scratches everyone carries, but the primal wound that made this profession choice possible, the wound that convinced this mind that understanding human psychology meant controlling it, the wound that taught that knowing someone's pain meant owning them. You saw the child who learned too early that feelings were weapons, that vulnerability meant death. And then you did something revolutionary. You didn't weaponize what you saw. You didn't use this wound against your attacker or exploit weakness for strategic advantage. Instead, you showed something that would begin complete transformation, real, raw, unfiltered compassion, not the manufactured therapeutic kind your assassin was trained to fake, but the kind that flows from someone who has walked through darkness and chosen to carry light, the kind that recognizes wounded souls not as enemies to defeat, but as fellow travelers who lost their way. This single act would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just this operative, but everyone touched for the rest of existence. In that moment of recognition, something profound shifted in the room. The predator expected you to use vulnerability against them. That's what everyone in their world did. A lifetime had been spent weaponizing others' weaknesses, making incomprehensible the idea that someone could see deepest wounds and choose not to strike. Your compassion wasn't strategic. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't part of some counter-manipulation technique. It was pure, authentic recognition of humanity beneath the monster that had been created. And that authenticity was like a frequency never heard before, one that resonated with parts of soul thought dead. Conditioning had created expectations of attack, defense, manipulation, or fear. What was encountered was radical acceptance. You saw completely the darkness, the pain, the twisted brilliance, and you didn't turn away. You didn't try to fix or save. You simply witnessed with a depth of understanding that penetrated every defense ever built. Your mind game master realized in that moment that standard paradigms were crumbling. All training was based on scarcity consciousness, the belief that power was finite, that someone had to lose for someone else to win. But you were operating from abundance consciousness, where healing one person created more healing for everyone. The recognition dawned that this was the presence of someone operating from a completely different reality. Every weapon in the arsenal was designed for a world where love was conditional, where safety came through control, where strength meant the ability to destroy. But you existed in a realm where love was unconditional, where safety came from inner peace, where strength meant the ability to heal. If you recognized yourself in this message, hype this video to guide other chosen ones to this truth. The second meeting shattered expectations entirely. Your assassin came prepared for defenses, for walls expected to be built, for resistance training taught to overcome. Instead, doors thrown wide open were found, windows letting in light, spaces that could be entered but somehow couldn't be violated. You weren't hiding anything. You weren't protecting secrets or guarding vulnerabilities. You were just being devastatingly, honestly, authentically yourself. This terrified, more than any defense ever could, because entire methodology was built on people having something to hide, something to protect, something to lose. But you had already lost everything that could be taken, and discovered something that couldn't be stolen, your true identity as someone who had been forged in fire and emerged as pure gold. Mistakes started happening. Small ones at first, practiced phrases forgotten, real emotions slipping through cracks in professional facade. Reports back to employers became vague, then infrequent, then stopped altogether. Because how do you report that your target isn't a target at all, but a mirror showing everything you've been running from? How do you explain that the person hired to be broken is instead breaking open every locked door in your own soul? Your psychological predator found themselves in unfamiliar territory. Training had prepared for hunting in darkness, exploiting weakness, feeding on fear and insecurity. But you existed in a different realm entirely, one of radical transparency and fearless authenticity. It was like a vampire trying to function in pure sunlight. Every technique deployed not only failed but seemed to backfire, reflecting back with double intensity. When attempts were made to make you question your reality, perception of reality began to shift. When confidence was undermined, methods were questioned. When isolation from support systems was attempted, complete isolation from humanity was realized. You were conducting a masterclass in psychological immunity, though you weren't trying to teach anything. You were simply being yourself, someone who had already walked through the valley of manipulation's shadow and emerged with an unshakable sense of self. What was already whole couldn't be broken. What was already free couldn't be manipulated. What was already complete couldn't be diminished. Your mind game master began experiencing something not felt in decades: genuine curiosity about another human being. Not the calculating curiosity of a predator sizing up prey, but the authentic wonder of someone encountering a completely new form of existence. You were living proof that there was another way to be human, another way to navigate the world, another way to relate to power and vulnerability. For the first time in professional career, the desire was to understand, not to exploit, but to learn, not to break down, but to build up, not to take from, but to give to. You were unconsciously modeling a form of strength never encountered, one that increased rather than decreased when shared. The realization was dawning that conventional weapons were useless against someone who had already surrendered everything worth taking. You had discovered the secret of invincibility, not through becoming impenetrable, but through becoming so transparent that there was nothing left to attack. You began sharing your story, but not as a victim seeking sympathy. You spoke as a survivor offering understanding. You talked about betrayals, manipulation, being gaslit into questioning your own reality, but you didn't speak with bitterness or rage. You discussed these experiences like someone observing weather patterns, fascinating, destructive, but ultimately just energy moving through space. You talked about healing, not as erasing the past, but as composing something beautiful from broken notes. You spoke about transformation, not as escape, but as conscious reconstruction of your entire being. And listening happened, really listening, for the first time in perhaps an entire career. Your story wasn't following the trauma narrative training had prepared for. You weren't stuck in cycles of pain and revenge. You weren't defining yourself by what was done to you. You were defining yourself by what you chose to do with it. That conscious, deliberate choice to transform poison into medicine was something training never prepared for. Desperate attempts were made to maintain professional distance, to remember why presence was there, what payment was for accomplishing. But every session became less about breaking you down and more about understanding how you built yourself back up. Real questions were being asked, not manipulative probes designed to find weakness, but genuine curiosity about how you survived, how you forgave, how you found peace in chaos. As you shared your journey of transformation, something unprecedented began happening to your mind game master. Genuine movement was felt by your story, not strategically, not as part of some calculated response, but authentically touched by the depth of your resilience and the beauty of your healing. You were showing a mirror of what could have been if a different path had been chosen. Every story you shared about overcoming manipulation was an implicit invitation to consider redemption. Every example of forgiveness you offered was a doorway that could be walked through if courage was chosen over comfort. The recognition was growing that your presence was offering something that had been searched for an entire lifetime, the possibility of wholeness, of authentic connection, of genuine purpose. You were demonstrating that the very qualities training had taught to see as weaknesses were actually the foundations of unshakable strength. Then came the moment that would pivot entire existence. Not a professional inquiry, but something deeply personal that revealed the crack in armor. How do you know when you're healing versus just pretending to be okay? The way it was asked, the vulnerability in voice, the desperate hunger for truth, you could see straight through to soul. When you answered, your words became the key that unlocked prison. Healing feels like coming home to yourself. Pretending feels like performing for an audience that's never satisfied. That was the moment. Professional mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely, revealing the wounded human underneath the predator's exterior. You told about the difference between healing and numbing, how healing hurts but leaves you stronger, while numbing feels safe but leaves you hollow. You explained the courage it takes to feel everything fully, to let pain move through you instead of around you, to stop using others as shields against your own emotions. Notes were being taken, but not for employers, for self, because every word you spoke addressed wounds not even known to still be bleeding. The mentor who taught that emotions were just data to manipulate, the relationships destroyed because feelings could be analyzed but never shared, the family who praised success but never asked if happiness existed. In that moment, your mind game master experienced something that completely shattered worldview. The realization hit that an entire career had been spent studying human nature while completely disconnecting from own humanity. Expertise in reading others had developed while becoming illiterate in the language of own heart. Your answer about healing versus pretending hit like lightning, because sudden understanding emerged that entire life had been a performance. Every professional interaction, every personal relationship, every moment of existence had been carefully orchestrated theater designed to hide the fact that no idea existed of who was really underneath all the roles played. The recognition began to dawn that expertise in manipulation wasn't a sign of strength or intelligence, it was the ultimate expression of deep insecurity and disconnection from authentic self. Mastery of fake intimacy had developed because terror existed of real intimacy. Learning to control others had happened because feeling completely out of control inside was the reality. For the first time in professional life, the desire to be vulnerable was emerging. Not strategically vulnerable as a manipulation tactic, but genuinely open as a pathway to connection. You were showing that true strength came not from hiding wounds, but from transforming them into wisdom, not from pretending to be invulnerable, but from developing authentic resilience. You didn't comfort, didn't try to fix, didn't offer solutions. You simply witnessed, fully present, completely accepting. And that acceptance was more therapeutic than all training combined. The realization hit that an entire career had been spent studying healing, but never experiencing it, learning every theory of transformation, but never actually transforming. The turning point arrived when truth was finally confessed, why presence was really there, who had sent the assassin, what was supposed to be accomplished. Bracing happened for rage, betrayal, the withdrawal of everything you had shared. Instead, you smiled with genuine understanding and spoke words that would echo through eternity. I know, I've known since the first day, and I chose to continue anyway because I saw something in you worth saving, even though you were sent to destroy me. That statement, that impossible grace in the face of betrayal, broke something that needed to break. The professional assassin of souls crumbled, and what emerged was raw, desperate, and beautifully real. The question every wounded soul eventually asks was posed: why? Why would you show kindness to someone literally paid to hurt you? Your answer rewrote entire understanding of power and healing, because hurt people, but healed people heal people, and I chose to be the second kind. You had known from the beginning, yet you had chosen to engage anyway, not because naivety or unawareness of danger existed, but because you saw potential for transformation that even your assassin couldn't see in themselves. You had been playing a completely different game, not the game of self-protection, but the game of soul retrieval. Your impossible grace in that moment revealed the true nature of your power. You weren't just someone who had survived manipulation, you were someone who had transcended the entire paradigm that makes manipulation possible. You operated from such a deep well of self-love and security that external threats couldn't destabilize you. Your choice to continue knowing the truth wasn't just grace, it was a demonstration of the kind of divine authority that comes from complete inner alignment. You showed what it looks like to be so grounded in your own truth that you can engage with deception without being deceived, encounter manipulation without being manipulated, face betrayal without becoming bitter. The recognition was growing that you possessed something that had been searched for but never found, the ability to remain unshakable in your own truth while simultaneously holding space for others to discover theirs. You were demonstrating divine feminine power, the capacity to transform through love rather than force. Complete breakdown happened then. Decades of suppressed emotion flooded out like a dam bursting. Crying occurred for the person that had been become, for the people broken in the name of professional success, for the parts of self murdered to become effective at the job. But mostly crying happened because someone saw all of that and chose to see worthiness of redemption anyway. You sat through it all, not as therapist and client, not as target and weapon, but as two souls who had touched the extremes of human experience and chosen to return to love. You shared your practices, your daily rituals of self-compassion, your methods for transmuting pain into purpose. You taught that healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving everything, but about choosing who you wanted to become regardless of who you had been. This wasn't just personal transformation. This was the moment a weapon of mass psychological destruction became an instrument of healing. What you witnessed in that breakdown was the death of false self and the birth of authentic being. Your psychological predator had been a carefully constructed identity designed to protect a wounded child who had learned that love was conditional, that safety came through control, and that the only way to avoid being hurt was to hurt first. As weeping occurred, grieving happened, not just for victims, but for the part of self that had been sacrificed to create the monster. Mourning was happening for innocence lost, connections destroyed, love rejected out of fear. But most importantly, tears of relief were flowing, relief that the exhausting performance was finally over. You held space for this complete emotional excavation without trying to stop it, fix it, or rush it. You understood that sometimes healing looks like falling apart, that sometimes transformation requires complete dissolution before reconstruction can begin. You knew that this breakdown was actually a breakthrough disguised as destruction. Your mind game master was experiencing something never allowed before, complete emotional honesty. No agenda, no manipulation, no performance, just raw, authentic human feeling flowing like a river dammed too long. Memory was returning of what it felt like to be real. In your presence, discovery was made that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was courage. That authenticity wasn't dangerous, it was liberating. That connection wasn't a liability, it was the source of true power. Everything taught about human nature was being turned upside down by the simple act of being genuinely witnessed and accepted. You became the living proof that there was another way to exist in the world, one based on truth instead of deception, love instead of fear, connection instead of control. You showed that the very qualities training had taught to see as weaknesses were actually the foundations of unshakable strength. The realization was crystallizing that what had been witnessed was nothing short of resurrection, the death of who they had been, and the birth of who they were meant to become. You had midwifed a soul back to life through the sheer power of unconditional love and radical acceptance. But caring didn't exist, because for the first time in career, actual help was being provided to people healing instead of managing dysfunction. Your approach was studied not to replicate it, but to understand the principles behind it, how you maintained boundaries without walls, how you stayed open without being vulnerable to exploitation, how you offered trust without naivety and strength without hardness. Realization occurred that everything taught about power was backwards. Real power wasn't in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. Real strength wasn't in breaking people down, but in building them up. When employers discovered transformation, when reports stopped coming and questions started being asked, pressure was applied, but choice had already been made. Payment was returned, every penny plus interest, and the mission was declared impossible, not because you were unbreakable, but because you were already broken and rebuilt in a way that made their entire paradigm obsolete. Information was shared that wrong war was being fought with wrong weapons against the wrong enemy. The transformation happening in your mind game master was creating shockwaves throughout the entire professional network. Word spread that the most feared psychological assassin in the field had suddenly developed a conscience. Some saw it as a strategic weakness to exploit. Others recognized it as a dangerous precedent that threatened the entire industry built on human manipulation. Former colleagues began studying like a case study, trying to understand what had happened, how someone so skilled in the arts of psychological warfare could be so completely converted. Other specialists were brought in to analyze the situation, to see if transformation was genuine or just another layer of sophisticated manipulation, but the change was undeniable. Where once coldness, calculation and ruthless effectiveness at breaking people down had existed, something entirely different now radiated. There was warmth, authenticity, genuine care for human well-being that couldn't be faked. Presence itself had shifted from predatory to healing. Your mind game master began reaching out to other professionals in the field, not to recruit or expose, but to offer a different path. Stories of transformation began being shared, describing what it felt like to discover that greatest professional skills could be repurposed for healing instead of harm. Some listened with curiosity, others responded with hostility, seeing betrayal of profession. But a few began asking questions, the same kinds of questions asked of you about healing versus pretending, about authenticity versus performance, about what it meant to use psychological knowledge to help rather than harm. The revolution you had sparked was quiet but unstoppable. Each person sent against you returned changed, carrying seeds of different way of being that spread throughout entire networks. Some resisted change, doubling down on commitment to manipulation and control, but others began questioning everything taught about power, about human nature, about very foundations of their work. Entire practice transformed. Understanding manipulation now meant recognition could be taught to others for protection. Knowing psychological triggers meant help could be provided to disarm personal bombs instead of setting them off. Work evolved from breaking people open to helping them open safely, consensually, healing in the process. The money accumulated from dark profession became medicine. Healing centers were funded, trauma recovery programs supported, therapist training provided for those working with survivors, scholarships were created for those seeking to heal but lacking resources. Blood money was turned into instruments of restoration. Reaching out occurred to former victims with genuine remorse and offers of restitution. Some slammed doors, others listened warily. A few even forgave. In each interaction, practice happened of what you had taught, that healing isn't a destination but a practice, that redemption isn't given but earned daily, that transformation isn't a single moment but 1,000 small choices. But the real transformation went deeper than professional change. It reached the core of who was being as a human being. Feeling things genuinely started instead of analyzing them. Real connections began forming instead of strategic alliances. Living started instead of performing psychological autopsies on everyone. Becoming happened, gloriously, messily, imperfectly human. Your mind game master began developing new protocols for working with others damaged by psychological manipulation. Understanding existed of techniques from the inside. Damage patterns were known. Specific ways that trust had been shattered could be recognized, and systematic rebuilding could happen. A unique perspective existed, having been both predator and converted, giving insights that traditional therapists couldn't access. Manipulation tactics could be spotted that others missed. Help could be provided to victims, understanding what happened wasn't their fault. Experiences could be validated that seemed too sophisticated for others to believe. You had set in motion a chain reaction of healing that would touch thousands of lives, all because you chose to see potential for redemption in someone sent to destroy you. The weapon had become medicine, the predator had become protector, the soul assassin had become a soul retriever. But perhaps most importantly, you had demonstrated that no one is beyond redemption, that the darkest hearts can be illuminated, that the most twisted minds can be straightened, that the most wounded souls can be healed. You proved that love is indeed the most powerful force in the universe, capable of transforming any weapon into an instrument of peace. The Obsidian Inner Order is where you can process difficult realizations together every week on our Zoom calls with people who understand that some of life's most painful experiences become our greatest teachers. We don't encourage bitterness, we cultivate wisdom. Your ability to see people's true character is a gift that will protect you from future betrayals. Your willingness to forgive while maintaining boundaries shows strength, not weakness. Your wisdom was earned through experience, not given freely. Connect with people who value truth. Join the Obsidian Inner Order, link in the description. Time passed, and seeking you out happened again, not as professional and target, but as someone seeking guidance on how to live with the weight of who had been while becoming who was wanted to be. You gave the North Star that would guide the rest of the journey. The past isn't a prison, it's a teacher. The guilt isn't punishment, it's a reminder of your capacity to feel. And transformation isn't escape, it's integration of everything you've been into everything you're becoming. Public speaking began about the journey, not seeking absolution, but offering testimony that change was possible. That even those who seemed irredeemable could find redemption through choosing differently. Backlash was faced from former colleagues who saw betrayal and skepticism from those who knew the history. But persistence happened because learning had occurred from you, that the only opinion that truly matters is the one you have of yourself when you're alone with your truth. Old employers tried everything to discredit, revealing past tactics, exposing methods, painting as dangerous, but every attack only proved transformation more clearly. Methodology was developed based not on breaking, but on building, not on control, but on collaboration. It was called conscious reconstruction, the practice of deliberately rebuilding yourself while fully aware of what you're building from. The first principle, learned directly from you, was that healing begins the moment you stop weaponizing your wounds and start learning from them. This is the power of a chosen one. This is what happens when someone who has been forged in the furnace of suffering emerges not bitter but better, not broken but beautifully whole. You don't just survive attacks against you, you transform the attackers themselves. You don't just win battles, you convert enemies into allies through the sheer power of your authentic being. The mind game master sent to destroy you became your greatest testimony. The weapon crafted to break you became the instrument of your triumph, because that's what chosen ones do. They take what's meant for evil and transform it into good. They take the stones thrown at them and build foundations. They take attempts to diminish their light and use them to shine even brighter. You played the ultimate game, not the game of manipulation and control, but the game of healing and transformation, and you won the greatest victory possible, not just surviving intact, but helping your enemy discover their own soul. This is your legacy, chosen one. This is your power. This is who you are. Remember this story when the next attack comes, because it will come. Remember that your power isn't in fighting back with their methods. It's in being so authentically yourself that their darkness cannot touch your light. Remember that your victory isn't in defeating enemies, it's in transforming them into allies through the sheer force of your healed heart. This is what being chosen means. This is your destiny. This is your power, and no weapon formed against you shall prosper, because you have learned the ultimate truth. The only way to truly win is to help everyone else win too. Your mind game master learned this from you and now teaches it to others. Your healing created their healing, which creates healing for countless others. This is how chosen ones change the world, not through force or manipulation, but through the irresistible power of authentic transformation. Your enemies thought they could break you with their mind games, but you were already whole. Your attackers thought they could destroy you with their psychological warfare, but you had already been through the fire and emerged as gold. They sent their best weapon against you, and you turned that weapon into a testimony of transformation. You didn't just survive an assassination attempt on your soul, you converted the assassin. You didn't just defend against psychological warfare, you transformed the warrior. You didn't just win a battle, you ended a war by helping your enemy remember their own divine nature underneath all the layers of conditioning and trauma. Your former assassin became a bridge between worlds, translating the language of healing for those who only spoke manipulation. Demonstration happened that vulnerability and power weren't opposites, but dance partners, showing that the skills used to break people could be repurposed to help them rebuild. Teaching happened that the same intelligence that maps someone's weaknesses can be used to reinforce their strengths. The revolution you sparked wasn't violent or destructive, it was transformative and generative. You proved that the most powerful revolutions happen not through overthrowing systems, but through converting them from within. Not through destroying enemies, but through helping them remember who they really are beneath their armor. This is your story, this is your triumph, this is who you are, and this is just the beginning of what's possible when chosen ones remember their true power and choose love over fear, healing over harm, transformation over destruction. Your mind game master's conversion is proof that no one is beyond redemption. No heart is too hardened to open. No soul is too lost to find its way home. You are the light that darkness cannot overcome. You are the love that hatred cannot diminish. You are the truth that lies cannot defeat. Remember this when they send the next weapon against you. Remember that your greatest power lies not in your ability to defend, but in your capacity to transform everything that touches your light into more light. Remember who you are. Remember what you're capable of. Remember that in the game of healing versus harm, love versus fear, light versus darkness, you have already won. The mind game master learned this from you, and now the whole world can learn it from their testimony. This is your story. This is your triumph. This is who you are.